This session takes place at Texas Card House in North Austin. It's a late Thursday afternoon. I'm playing 1-2 no limit holdem, and there's $5 Pot-Limit Omaha double board bomb pots, once per orbit and on each dealer change. I buy in for $300 total. This first hand is a PLO bomb pot, and I've got ace, jack, jack, 8 with 3 clubs in my hand. We've got 7 players in the flop for a pot of $35. The flop comes 10-6-3 with 2 clubs on top, and jack 8-4 rainbow on bottom. So I've got the nut flush draw with an overpair on the top board, although there's one less out since I have 3 clubs in my hand, and top set on the bottom board, which is a pretty safe board in terms of the suits, though there are some straight opportunities. When it checks to me, I bet pot for $35 and I get 3 callers. On the turn, we see the 2 of spades on top and a 4 on the bottom. My hand on top doesn't improve, but the bottom board pair is giving me the best possible boat. When it checks to me, I bet pot for $140. Unfortunately, my phone has some issues and we lose the footage here, but I'll still go over what happens. We see 2 players call, with one of the players being all in for $5 less than my pot size bet, bringing the pot to $555. On the river, we see the 6 of clubs on top and a blank on the bottom board. I pick up the nut flush on the top board, though it's now a paired board. I've still got the near nuts on the bottom board to go along with my flush, so when it checks to me, I'm happy to push the rest of my stack in for $110. My opponent thinks for a bit before making the call, so we've got $220 in the side pot and $555 in the main. For the side pot, my opponent shows he had 2 pair on the top board, but he got counterfeited by the 6. My pocket jacks would have been good enough to take that board even if he didn't hit the flush, but as expected, my boat on the bottom board was good, so I end up scooping the side pot for $220. For the main pot, my other opponent shows pocket 8s, meaning they flopped a smaller set and picked up a worse boat on the bottom board. I scooped the $555 main pot as well for a total of $775. In the next hand, I've got king jack suited in spades. I'm under the gun +1, and I open for $10. 3 players end up calling, bringing the pot to $42. The flop brings king 8-7 with 2 hearts, so I've got top pair and a pretty good kicker. When it checks to me, I lead for $25. Only the button player calls, bringing the pot to $92. The turn brings an offsuit 3. This card's pretty much a blank. I check for some pot control and to see what my opponent does here. Unfortunately, my phone has issues again, and the video dies here. This is the last time we'll have issues, I promise. So my opponent bets $50, and I make the call here since I have no reason to fold at this point, and the pot is $192 now. The river brings an offsuit jack. I hit 2 pair, and I think there's a good chance I have the best hand now. I decide to give my opponent a chance to bet in case he's bluffing though, so I check to him. He bets $75, which seems like a pretty small bet relative to the size of the pot for this game. I don't really know how to explain it, but the demeanor with which he sized his bet before making it led me to believe that his hand wasn't any stronger than mine. Based upon his bet size and his demeanor, I really felt like I had the best hand here, and I decided that I could get more value with the raise. I ended up coming over the top for $225 total, so $150 more to my opponent. After about 2 or 3 minutes of thinking, he finally makes the call and reveals king jack offsuit for the same 2 pair. Knowing after the fact what he had, I probably would have raised more and perhaps gone all in, trying to push him off his hand, but despite chopping the pot, I feel pretty good about my read here and my play overall. For this next hand, I've got 10-6 suited in spades. I'm sitting in the small blind. 2 players limp in and I complete for $1 more. Big blind checks and we go to the flop. The flop comes 10-6-5 with 2 clubs, so I flop top 2 pair on a kind of wet board. I check, expecting one of the limpers who's proven to be a bit aggressive when checked to in many hands to bet out here. He ends up betting as expected, making it $10, and the other limper, who's been a pretty passive caller in most hands, calls behind. Given the wetness of the board, I decide to make a big raise here in hopes of charging any draws, making it $50 total. The original bettor makes the call, and the passive player ends up pushing all in for $96 total. When it returns to me, I don't want the third player to be priced in for a draw, so I push all in on top and have him covered. He ends up folding, so we get a run out against the all-in player in a $250 pot. She flips over her hand and shows 10-3 suited in clubs for top pair with the flush draw. We just need to avoid a club. The turn in river brings 2 red queens, and we don't see any clubs. Unfortunately though, since the board paired up, my opponent and I are both playing the same hand with queens and 10s and a 6 kicker, and we're chopping the pot now. We essentially won $29 for all that action. This next hand is another PLO bomb pot. I've got king queen jack 7 with spades. There's 8 players to the flop, bringing the pot to $40. The flop comes jack 7-10 rainbow on top and ace 8-2 with 2 diamonds on bottom. I've got top and bottom pair and a straight draw on the top board and nothing but unlikely backdoor draws on bottom. The aggressive player bets pot for $40. 2 players call. I think for a bit and consider folding since I'm losing to a straight, a set, or a better 2 pair, but I think I have enough outs that it warrants a call. I could hit an ace or a 9 on the top board for a straight, and I've got 4 more outs for a jack or 7 that would make me a boat, which would beat a made straight. In all, I'm getting 5-to-1 pot odds versus 2.5-to-1 odds on turning a card that I think would improve my hand. Given the rough math, I make the call. The pot's now $200. The turn brings the 7 diamonds on top and the 9 of clubs on bottom. I make the boat on top with 7s full of jacks. I also pick up a gut shot draw on the bottom board. Making the boat here, I think I'm in a spot that I probably have to continue, even though I'm losing to a bigger boat if someone flopped a set. The aggressive player goes all in for $125. The player after him calls, and the third player folds. I go all in with my opponent covered, and after thinking for a bit, he makes the call for his last $280. So we've got $310 in the side pot and $655 in the main. The river brings the 8 of clubs on top and the 8 of spades on bottom. My hand is unchanged on the top board, and I miss the straight on bottom. The aggressive player shows ace jack 10-9 with hearts. He flopped a better 2 pair on top, meaning the 2 jacks I was counting as outs weren't actually outs, so the 7 saved me here. He's got 2 pair on bottom, so I'm splitting the side pot with him, $155 each. The other player shows ace king 7-3 with diamonds. He picked up trips and a diamond draw on the top board when I hit my boat, and thankfully didn't hit a bigger boat on the river. He also had a worse 2 pair than the aggressive player on bottom, meaning the aggressive player and I are splitting the main pot as well for $325 each, $480 total between the 2 pots. I'm now sitting with over $1,000 in my stack for my $300 buy-in.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I was hoping it was a king because I knew he probably already had a full house. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Straight draw on the other board.
Awesome. Thank you.
For this next hand, I've got Queen 9 suited in hearts, and I'm sitting in the cutoff. The first 2 players into the pot limp in, and when it folds to me after that, I raise to $16. Only the 2 limpers call, bringing the pot to $51. The flop comes 10-7-3 with 2 diamonds. This isn't a good flop for my range versus my opponent's range, so when it checks to me, I decide to check behind in hopes of improving or seeing a high card that I can bluff on the turn. The turn brings the ace of spades. The first player checks, and the second makes a weak bet for $15. This is the best card for my pre-flop raising range, and I decide it's a good opportunity to play like I've got a strong hand now. I decide to raise to $45. The player who checked cold calls my raise, and the original bettor ends up folding. The pot's now $156. The river brings the 5 of clubs. I've missed everything, and given the cold call on the turn, I don't feel like I'm getting a fold here if I bet. I'm giving up on the hand, and when it checks to me, I check behind. My opponent announces he missed though, and he shows 9-8 offsuit for a straight draw, 9 high. Surprisingly, my queen high is good enough to win. The very next hand, I'm dealt ace king offsuit, and I'm sitting in the hijack. It folds to me, so I open to $10. It folds around to the same player who missed his draw the last hand, and he pushes all in for his last $39. I make a simple call here when it folds back to me, bringing the pot to $79, and we get to see a full run out. My opponent shows he's got pocket kings, so I only have 3 aces as outs. We see an ace in the door when the flop comes ace 8-4 with 2 diamonds. The turn and river are bricks, bringing 10 and 3 of diamonds. So there's 4 diamonds on the board, but thankfully my opponent doesn't have the king of diamonds, and I end up scooping the pot. In this next hand, I've got 8-6 suited in clubs. I'm sitting under the gun +1. The first player to act limps in, and I decide to limp behind. There's 1 more limper, and the same player from the last 2 hands, who's sitting in the cutoff, raises to $10. The button, the small blind, and the under the gun players all call the $10 raise, and I decide to call too, given the action. The player behind me calls as well. There's $60 in the pot, and there's 6 of us to the flop. The flop comes 3 queen king with 2 clubs. I flop a flush draw, and I'm hoping for a cheap opportunity to see the turn. It checks around to the cutoff player, who makes it $18. The button immediately raises to $75. The under the gun player on my right flat calls the raise, and I have some thinking to do now. I'm getting about 3-to-1 pot odds on a call here. If the original bettor calls as well, my odds are closer to 3.8 to 1. I can't assume he's going to call, though he has already counted out calling chips and has them in hand, so it's probably a safe assumption to make. I would need to hit one of the 9 remaining clubs to make a straight. However, I don't think the king of clubs is a valid out since the raiser likely has 2 pair or a set, and another king would probably give him a vote. So realistically, I've got 8 outs left. My odds of improving are a little less than 4-to-1. My direct odds are not good enough, and implied odds might say I should call, but the fact that there are multiple players in the hand and that my flush draw is relatively low, I don't feel like it's a good opportunity to continue. I decide to fold, but I really want to see how this plays out. The turn brings the king of clubs. This is the biggest card I was worried about seeing if I played. It's the one club that gives me a flush but also pairs the board. However, we see the action slow down and both players check. The river brings the 10 of hearts. The under the gun player who cold called the flop raise now leads for $100, and the button makes the call. The button immediately shows he has king 3 for a flop 2 pair, hitting his boat on the turn. My read was right, and even more, my fold prevented me from getting drawn further into the hand when a club that paired the board hit. The under the gun player ends up revealing ace 4 of clubs for the turned nut flush, which had me beat as well. Good fold all around, and I'm happy with my decision here. The last hand I'm involved with is another PLO bomb pot. I'm dealt 8-7-7-6, double suited with spades and diamonds. I'm sitting under the gun and we see 9 players to the flop. The pot's $45. The flop comes 6-7-6 with 2 hearts on top and 4-10-2 with 2 spades on bottom. I flop the stone cold nuts on the top board. I have 7s full of 6s and I know no one has quads since I've got a 6 in my hand as well. My only concern is that a straight flush or a bigger boat could hit if someone's holding a bigger pair, but I'm pretty much going to play this all the way through like I've got the nuts. On the bottom board, I've also got a flush draw. It's not a great one, but it does mean there's a chance I could scoop. Since I'm sitting in early position, I check with the idea that I'll let someone else bet to get some more money into the pot before I get aggressive. The aggressive player from earlier, who's sitting 2 seats to my left, ends up betting $20, and 5 players call before it comes back to me. I raise to $100. The aggressive player from earlier hands makes the call. The player behind him goes all in for $120. The small blind, who recently joined our table, makes the call for $120, and I call the extra $20, as does the original bettor. The turn brings the queen of diamonds on top and the ace of clubs on bottom. I'm only losing on top board if somebody has pocket queens, but again, I'm not going to play like that's going to happen. I don't improve on the bottom board, but when the small blind checks to me, I bet pot for $565. The aggressive player calls all in for his $345, and the small blind player calls all in for his last $20. We've now got $1,275 in the pot, $650 in the side and $625 in the main. The river brings the 10 of hearts on top and the 2 of hearts on bottom. We missed the flush on the bottom board, unfortunately, so we're hoping no one's holding queens or 10s to have outdrawn us on the top board. The aggressive player shows his hand first so that we can see who won the side pot. He shows ace queen 10-5 with hearts for the rivered flush on top, which doesn't beat my boat, and 2 pair on the bottom board. We're chopping the side pot, which means we're just pulling our money back and not winning anything extra there. The small blind shows ace queen jack 5 with clubs for a missed wheel draw on the bottom that turned into a worse 2 pair than the aggressive player's holding. He mucks, and I split the main pot for $315 each.
Shit. I would've made that straight. You're good at getting me out of pots, man. I guess it was his bet, but shit.
Thank
Once
you.
you called, I'm not calling.
Just wrapped up a little over 2-hour session at Texas Card House, and it was a pretty great session. It ran really well. I hit a lot of big flops, monster hands in some big PLO bomb pot double board hands, which those are always almost always guaranteed to have big pots. So I'm excited to have taken in a win after having a couple of kind of like back and forth sessions of winning a small amount or losing what I brought. Feels good to have another pretty sizable win. I bought in for $300 and cashed out for, I think it was $1,264, so $964 win, which I'm happy to take. I mentioned in a previous video that I'm going to keep trying to grind up to 10K bankroll, at which point I'm hoping to take a stab at 10.5, so that gets me just a little bit closer to that goal. I think my bankroll is around like 30, somewhere between 35 to 3,800 right now. So I guess we're just going to keep going. Thanks for watching. I hope you hit the like and subscribe button, help get some more viewers. Otherwise, I will see you next time.